because we have a lease on that building for another 4 years.
Get him on.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, there'll still be a lot of cars in that parking lot, but they're all working.
So Ricky doesn't own that building?
They don't like to own their buildings. They don't even own this new store.
Who owns that, or is it out a developer?
It's a developer. He builds it. He gets all the permits. They build and everything is back to the You know, most of them, they're just hiring here. Yeah, they might have offered to some of them if they were really good to move here. What's that? I'm sorry. Or the call center. The call center actually has already started. So they started shifting some of it, but now they're going to pretty much close it in Fargo and just have it here. Yeah.
Hi there.
I think there's a plug-in.
Okay.
If you need it.
Hi.
Okay, since it's 2:30, we're going to get started today. And first of all, I want to welcome everyone. It's wonderful to have such a great turnout this afternoon. I'm Lane Larson, and I'm the superintendent of schools.
And I'm Cassandra Torstenson, city administrator for Brainerd.
Yeah, and so we're going to keep this kind of informal as far as roll call. I would like to announce that from the Board of Education, we have Tom Heglin and Bob Nystrom at the table. And also in the audience, Sue Kern is here. So there is a quorum of the school district here of the Board of Education.
Currently, we have Dave Bedell here for our city council. I think we expect one other attendee.
So shall we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Sure.
No flags protected. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. As far as the agenda today, there were basically 4 different items that people said that they wanted to visit about, and one is starting with the ordinance, and so we'll turn it over to the board members.
Okay.
So, thanks for being here.
You want to start, Tom?
We were going to first discuss the ordinance, and I think that, I don't know if Dave or Cassandra are going to do that.
Sure. Do you want me to start? Yeah, the ordinance as it's written is grammatically incorrect. So I can see where there could have been some confusion with that. There's a comma where it should have been a semicolon. So it reads that schools, and although high schools has been crossed out, it makes it sound as though all schools, including universities, where in reality we've removed all the parking restrictions for schools in the area except for the college and universities. So there are no parking restrictions in the city of Brainerd for schools.
Okay. And is the city council going to take action on that?
We shouldn't need to. I think Cassandra said that we shouldn't need to. It's a grammatical error. It should have been caught on our part, and it's unfortunate that we didn't catch that.
Okay.
Well, maybe if we can just back up a little bit. So we're going off of the code previous to this change that happened, I believe, in January,
Yep.
January 17th. And so prior to that, of course, schools are under that code, and that's what we submitted when we put all of our plans together, is adhering to that, or not adhering, and I'll speak on that in a bit, but recognizing that code. And then sometime in January, the city then, it sounds like they made the change. We weren't notified of it, I don't believe, but certainly aware of it through the dispatch, et cetera. Still, of course, reads schools, universities, and colleges. But the change that was made, we knew that we were going to have even a tougher time meeting code because of the change in the language. But we continued with our plan, putting together what would be a real minimal parking, knowing that we're going to have to come to City Council and ask for a variance because there was just no way we could meet code. So that's kind of where we are today. And maybe I think if we could just review so that we're make sure that we're all on the same page. If you wouldn't mind, Corey, I think we've got what was.
I would like to clarify for the record, there was a notice of a hearing sent out in December 5th of 2017 about the change.
Sure, yeah.
There was also contact made with the school in December to let you guys know that there was going to be a change.
Good, thank you. Yep.
On that contact, talking about that we would be having this hearing and that the off-street parking requirements. So there was contact.
Good, okay.
So I just wanted to make sure I
Sure,
cleared that up.
sure.
It was just a matter of grammatical error, but we had at least there was going to be a change.
So, yeah, if we can just take just so that everybody's aware of what what we've been working off of. So let's just look at what the code was. I forget what slide that one was. So this is the ordinance 1476, and what was DD, where schools were included, and then it went on to give a little bit more of the details of elementary schools, etc. And then that was this the only amendment to that code? Just that piece?
Simply remove the requirement for schools to have off-street parking to make the project in schools, so that you wouldn't have to.
Oh, okay. And did that go through your normal ordinance? You go through like 2 or 3 readings?
Yep, it all happened. We had a notice of the hearing that we had in December. We held the hearings that were required. We did the normal ordinance review process, and it was adopted in January of 2018.
Okay, good. And then maybe if we can just look at, so the way the code currently reads, and it's
I'm Jan.
I'm Tom Haglund.
Nice to meet you. Yes, we have. Thank you.
The way it currently reads, schools, colleges, universities, etc., and then again with the way that the language was, and the way the code changes, the parking restrictions are even greater, more difficult to meet. So again, knowing that we're going to have to go to the council and ask for variance because we can't even come close to reaching that. So recently, then finding out the schools was supposed to have a semicolon and not a comma. Out of curiosity, why would you even have the word schools in there, not just college and university?
Well, if you look at that when it's completed, it's out of context from understanding what has taken place over the past 2 months to get to that. If somebody out of the community is opening up our zoning code and reading it the way it's written there, I can understand how someone outside of the community might go, schools, oh, that must mean elementary and high school. But in our community, when we were going through the hearing process, we made it abundantly clear to the community what was changing, what was being changed, and we explicitly spelled that out so that there was no misunderstanding by our community what the change was going to be. It's explicitly stated in our hearing notice is what above and beyond we typically put in the hearing notice because of the ramifications of all of this. We have mailed this out of courtesy to all the property owners within 350 feet of the schools at the time of the hearing. But we wrote, if approved, the amendment would mean that the city of Brainerd zoning ordinance would not include minimum off-street parking requirements for elementary, junior high, and high schools. Should additional off-street parking be desired, or should off-street parking removal be desired, it will be at the discretion of the school administration to determine the desired amount. City of Brainerd zoning ordinance minimum off-street requirements listed above would not apply, meaning DE or EE.
It's mixed up on,
The zoning ordinance requirements for colleges and universities are not proposed to be removed at this time. So, community-wise, we felt that we were making it 100% abundantly clear what was being amended. And as Cassandra had mentioned to you, and as the councilman had mentioned, yes, grammatically speaking, we should have put a semicolon there, but it's not there.
Sure. Well, so and I'm just speaking for one board member. Thank you for making that change, because it doesn't appear we have to come before the council and ask for variance anymore, because again, and we'll show you an example, we can't even come close to meeting what I would interpret as current code. The schools do have to be a part. I mean, that's, if I had not attended any of those, and I'm going to look at what code is, that's what it is. And I believe that's what our professionals, our consulting firms, and our architectural firms, that's how they're interpreting that schools are not omitted from this. So I think it's great news that you're looking out for the schools, and that giving us that flexibility. Can you add anything else? Otherwise, I'm going to move into the next piece. Go ahead.
No, I totally agree. I think we were looking at trying to get a large variance at a number of these sites, and as you guys know, through the referendum, our hope, the community told us loud and clear they wanted neighborhood elementary schools. Harrison is our most difficult project. When the professionals told us what we should do, they really recommended Buffalo Hills Lane because we own 20 acres there. But the neighborhood said, no, we want to keep it there. And Mark, I remember when you were at one of those meetings, you said, the city will oppose you if you move this to Buffalo Hills Lane. And so we heard that loud and clear, and that's why we did it. But now we're in the planning, and maybe that goes into the second part.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So Harrison is going to become a larger school. So it's not just parking. It also includes, the school now is going to, the new part of the school is going to be built into what is the current playground. The other thing you have to understand, when Harrison was built in 1938, I bet at least 90% of those kids walked to school. That has really changed at all of our elementaries. A lot of the kids are bused. And the other thing is with safety, a lot of parents don't even want their kids to walk 2 or 3 blocks anymore. They want to drop those kids off. So in the planning, because this will be a new school and because it'll be bigger, we want to build it for the future. And a big part of that too is safety. But, and maybe I'm getting too far ahead of myself, we don't want to just go out there and buy as many houses as we can and tear them down. We would rather save that money to build, whether it's building allowing a better project to be built at some of these buildings. So, I don't know.
Yeah, well, so maybe so at least to get, so we're all on the same page, how we got to where we are. So, literally until a few weeks ago, this is a code. We know we're not going to come close to meeting that. We know we're going to have to come for variance. So it's great news that the schools don't have to abide by this. That's a sigh of relief, quite honestly. Like, okay, because we couldn't hit that. So one of the things that we also heard loud and clear is not only do we need to retain the neighborhood schools, But we also heard loud and clear that get your staff off of the streets when they're parking and when they're working.
Can I ask where you heard that? Because I was at the Harrison meeting, I was at the Garfield meeting, I was at the high school meeting, I was at the Forest View meeting, planning and zoning meeting, as well as the council meeting, and I did not hear that spoken at those meetings.
We had 100 plus, 103 sessions or so, comments throughout.
And I understand that, but
And also our principals, they get a lot of calls from people, especially at the high school. But we'll have kids that have to park 2 to 3 blocks away from the school. They're getting complaints of blocking driveways, kids throwing empty pop cups on their lawns. You know, why do these kids have to park in front of my house? And what's then happened is you've gone to 2-hour parking in a lot of those areas. Mayor Menk told me that their street went to 2-hour parking. Well, these kids now have to leave school to move their cars because that's their only option.
sure, can we separate the two, though? I'd like to separate the high school from the elementary, because those are two completely different scenarios, and I think that from the council level, we understand that as well.
But I should also tell you, the elementary schools, and Kathy Knowles is here. Do you ever get complaints from neighbors?
We get complaints from neighbors, but my real concern is safety, particularly, and so as Tom talked about it too. So what happens, we're a change site for buses. So the buses come behind Harrison, and they also come up on 16th. Well, in the wintertime when you're plowing, you know what that's like, because a lot of people don't move their cars, so it becomes very narrow. So what parents do is they drop their children off in the middle of the street. That is not safe, because you have the blind spot from the buses, and you have people coming, and you have them just stopping right there and kids jumping off, and then coming in on the grounds. And so my concern for parking is safety. It's not convenience. It's not about having to walk blocks or whatever. It's truly safety, particularly when we have Oak Street for our buses now, and drop off on 16th. It's not safe.
So, you know, again, just, you know, as we're trying to put all this together and recognizing that we're not meeting code, and even a recent example of 4 or 5 years ago when we were pushed hard by the city, you know, when we had a lot, Mark, I know you were really involved with that, where, you know, staff is parking on the streets, and a lot of neighbors complaining, and, you know, pushed hard for us to get this other additional parking lot opened up over here, and pushed us to push the district to put signs up, no parking on that side. So it isn't something that is new from complaints or concerns from a safety issue. It's not like that is new in the last several months. It's been going on for a number of years, and I think the city as well, you know, recognize the complications of staff parking on the streets. The Thrifty just opened, and there was a parking lot that was required to be put in. I can't imagine a business or another entity, or if the city of Brainerd decides to build a new city hall, I would hope that there's going to be some off-street parking to accommodate staff and visitors. So it isn't anything new, and I can't say that at the sessions that you were at, you know, if there weren't complaints there. And of course, we know a lot of times in a public setting, we're not going to hear the complaints. It's afterwards. So what we want to do is give you one example. If we could pull up like Lowell or Garfield, Corey.
I just want to make a statement. I was on a planning and zoning when that parking lot came in. But back then, that was something that was very important. You know, that's not the case now. You know,
the parking here.
The parking, the off-street parking is not that important. It's not, there's been new decisions and designs that is not making it as important as it was 5 or 10 years ago. So I think that's something we have to keep in mind too.
So can you share a little bit more on that? What has changed? What is, so that the concern of parking in front of neighborhood houses is not an issue anymore, or the
need to have parking spaces for off-street parking for employees, and that, it's not that important. It's more important now to keep the revenue or tax base instead of having a parking lot. Have it for, you know, property taxes, real estate. So it's been a change, and I think somehow we need to look past the past and see what's best for us in the future. So.
I think our thinking has evolved over the years. When this situation was being debated back in the
2000s.
And there was such a hue and cry by a number of property owners that surround this property that the conventional wisdom at the time was to address that concern that was being raised at that time, and to make all of the parties that were involved comfortable and come away with what was perceived to be a win-win was for that parking lot to be built. I think that over the years, with what Jan said about the economics of it, but with also learning some more about the impact of parking, perceptions of the impacts of parking in residential areas. On a broader scale, sure, there will be potential incidences of individual concerns, but on the broader scale, I think we've come a long way to understand that we can design our streets to accommodate parking for residents, for visitors, and in cases where you have churches, in cases where you have schools. Our neighborhood streets are designed to be able to accommodate that in a safe manner. Dropping kids off on and off that school is probably a separate issue that needs to be addressed better in the design. But when it comes to the day-to-day operations of a school or a church or any other historically accepted use that's not residential, I think that we've learned a lot about how our streets can accommodate large volumes of traffic as well as parking for and be done in a safe manner. In fact, what you want to be able to do is slow the traffic down. And that's what on-street parking helps do.
Yeah, and there are numerous concerns that we can address as we go forward, but I think let's let you continue and move through the points a little bit, and then we can get to the further discussion. But I agree with what they're saying in that there's a change in philosophy, if you will. There's a lot of data that is available to us now, and when you get that data, you start to be able to design more efficiently and safer. And so we continue to hear the word safety, and we'll talk about that later. But now that we're in the information age, now that we have access to the amount of data that we do, it's very simple to remove ourselves from this idea of, oh, all these things are happening, all these accidents are happening, and really get down and look at what happens and why it happens. And so when we talk about engineering, we talk about change of philosophy, that's where it comes from. It doesn't come from an idea of, oh, we think we know what's best for our citizens. It comes from, well, we can actually go back and look at the data and figure out what is the best route to do in these instances. And so when we get further on, we can discuss some of that stuff.
Maybe it's just best to advance, because I think, again, that's fantastic if the streets have been redesigned or whatever, re-engineered to accommodate. We're anxious to hear about that.
Sure. Oh, I'd love to kind of take a look at your actual, if we're going to follow the agenda here, I'd love, since we've got it pulled up, let's take a look at some of your specific stuff, because this is the first time that we're seeing actual specifics.
So this is an example of Garfield. The proposed on the right-hand side in the yellow of 67 off-street parking.
That would be to the north, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
It is.
Yeah. That's off to the north. And we didn't run the numbers, but I think it, again, per the code, which is it's a moot point at this stage of the game, semicolon and without any action, because that seems like a pretty, it's such a dramatic change, but we can't come close to meeting existing code. So that was the minimum from the staffing that we were looking to accommodate, to pull off staff. And that's what we're kind of looking at all locations.
And also, there's no street vacation at Garfield. I know, Dave, you were concerned about the safe routes to schools. That won't be affected by this.
So that's just an example.
So you're not going to be looking to vacate L Street.
Correct.
And about how much staff do you guys have at the Garfield location?
Isn't it around?
64.
Is it 64? So 60,
64 staff.
67 spots, and 64 of those are for staff.
Correct.
Can I ask you just a question on this one? Is this since you've realized the change?
No.
No.
No, this is
prior to realizing that there is no longer a city off-street parking.
correct.
So likely this is going to change. So what we're looking at is.
No, I would say not. This
Okay.
is, again, this was getting in preparation to come to the council asking for the variance, because we can't meet code.
Right.
We still believe, and we committed to the community of providing the off-street parking. We believe that that is the best. Ultimately, it's going to be the council's decision on what you decide you're going to require. But we're looking at that, and we continue to look at that as being the best practice. We just know that we can't meet code the way it's written today.
Yesterday's code.
Either
Well, the way it's written, the way it's published within the council codes, you can't.
And I'll just go back and re-emphasize that. In all of the public hearings, and also when the motion was passed, it was very clear that the intent was to remove.
Sure, yeah, and
So
again, that's great
when
news.
we republished it was the grammatical error. So that is something we can go back and read.
Yeah,
Can
no,
we,
and that's great.
Can we move past that?
Yeah,
I
yep.
mean,
Yeah, but I'm just so you
You're-
understand where to answer
I
your
do, but
question.
can we move past that part of it? I mean, we've made the action to remove it, and we made it for your benefit. Can we move past the fact that we may have to put a dot above our comma?
Sure.
Okay.
So I see you have separate bus, vehicle, and pedestrian traffic, and where is that going to be?
Is that on 10th Avenue?
Right, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that in your
Oh, no.
face, but is that?
They should explain that better.
So on the top of this diagram, that is west. And so on 10th Avenue, which is on the west side of Garfield, that is where we will have our bus drop-off pickup.
Okay.
And keeping our bus drop-off separate from our parent drop-off, you'll notice on 11th Avenue, on the east side of Garfield, that is where our parent drop-off and pickup is. What the district did when looking at these properties, we were researching the 4 properties on the north side, which we felt would have enough parking spots available to meet the staff members at Garfield only. And like Tom was saying, we knew that we weren't going to be in compliance with whatever ordinance we were talking about, but we were hoping to make sure that we had parking available for the staff at Garfield so that when guests came, parents came, volunteers came to work at the school on particular days, that they still would use the on-street parking.
And typically, most people want to park right in front of the school. So that's where it really becomes a bottleneck.
Why don't you go to Lowell maybe and we can show that example as well.
How many times a year, like at Garfield, are there events that take place that parents want to come for recitals or education, where there might be a couple of hundred cars?
Happens frequently, but it's, so we're not planning.
So do you want to say?
I would love to
Hey, Jody's the Garfield principal.
We just hosted our Veterans Day, and we had parents walking 4 and 5 blocks away to come to the event.
We have a very large group of people who come to concerts, so thank you for asking. We have our Veterans Day performance annually in November, and we have 3 other during the day events. And we've had to change how we host those events and what grade levels they can happen at because we just don't have the capacity for parking.
Which one's more important, the gym space or the, I mean, if we're gonna make a statement like that?
They are probably equitable.
Okay.
I know in December we will have our winter concerts. Around Christmas time we will have our kindergarten, we will fill the gym, and we will fill blocks for the parking. And
But
we kind of have them coming in waves.
is it the people or is it the cars that are causing you to have more than one session? Is it capacity to fit the people or is it capacity to fit the cars?
Oh. I think I had to stop a concert last year to announce, unfortunately, that one of the attendees of the concert was parked in front of the driveway of a neighbor. I had to stop a concert to find out who owned the gold minivan with license plate, et cetera, et cetera. One small example. But, that is a concern. And if I can quickly go back to the bus, we also have buses that park on
J Street?
the south side.
Okay.
We are a transfer site, so in the morning, for sure, we have buses parked all along J, and we actually have a bus parked on 11th where the parent drop-off is. We have 16 buses that come in the morning for general ed, and then we have 4 special ed buses that come in the morning for drop-off. So we are actually buses all along 10th, all along J, and one wrapped around the back end of 11th where that parent pickup drop-off is also occurring at the same time. And I have about 40 to 50 kids who walk or ride a bike every day. And they are currently on the street with the bus traffic, the parent traffic, the parked cars, both staff and neighborhood parked vehicles, which is really, I use the word a safe concern, really compounding the safety concern. So thank you for asking about events, because we do have many daytime events. We also have probably 15 to 20 daily volunteers. Local church has adopted us, and we have great participation rate for people coming. So we have, you can come most days, almost any time of the day, and most of that front block is already parked on, and they are headed up L, almost 2 blocks. We are headed up 11th and 10th, probably another block and a half of just people coming, shuttling between buildings. We have shared staff between Bowl and us, the Brainerd Learning Center and WES. We're coming to support students. We're pretty crowded. And I did meet a neighbor when I first became the principal. The neighbor said, you can buy my house any day and turn it into a parking lot. I love living next to a school, but I know how crazy it is. And he is one of the 4 properties that you live there.
Should we look at Lowell?
Do you want to look at another example?
Yeah, you guys continue forward.
So fairly similar. This is the yellows on the south of Lowell, correct?
And that's 5 properties?
65 properties, 60 parking stalls for 63 staff.
And where that blue is, that's a new addition, but that had been staff parking. It wasn't adequate for all the staff. It also will go out into the playground, so we just have to create some more space. Think when this school was built, there was just a couple hundred kids that went there at the most, and most of them probably lived within 4 or 5 blocks of the school. Now a lot of these kids are bused in, or their parents are driving them and dropping them off. So education has really changed, and we're trying to design this where we can handle those needs and go through the rest of the 21st century with it.
One difference with Lowell is that you'll notice on G Street, potentially be coming to the city council and asking to make that a one-way, which would be going west, because the parent drop-off and pickup goes that direction with the bus drop-off and pickup on 4th Avenue. And we have the principal, Todd Sauer, here from Lowell as well.
That's our issue. That's very much what Jody was saying, that the pickup and the drop-off issue is probably the biggest time where I see multiple calls to the police as far as issues of parents that are heading south, dropping their child off. There's cars parked all along the west side of 3rd Avenue, so that people will be heading south. They'll stop right in the middle of the street, open the doors, let the kids out, just because there is no parking on that or the west side of that street. So a lot of people don't want to take the loop around, and if they do take the loop and are headed north on 3rd Avenue, those spots are often filled with people that are parking, dropping off their kids, needing to talk to a teacher. So then people will just, again, stop right in the middle of the street, because there is no other place to park unless you park on the other side of 4th Avenue, which crosses our playground. So it's an issue that, like I said, we've had multiple conversations with the police. Working with Kristen, had him come and take a look. Is there something we should be doing different to try to accommodate? And he said, you're really your hands are tied. One thing that Jody, we have just a lot of events that aren't concerts. For example, just kids with the Halloween costumes. We had 65 volunteers sign up because they wanted to help their child get their costume. And right now, well, now it's with the snow, all of a sudden we see those streets start getting smaller because they can't push the snow far enough away. So then the parking gets closer, and pretty soon we are kind of a one-way down some of these streets. That just compounds the problem. So by taking 60 of our employees off of that, now all of a sudden we'll have parking on both sides.
Anything else on Lowell, or should we go to the?
Well, I think those are the couple examples. The rest of Harrison is still being worked on, reconsidered.
Quick question, is there currently parking on G Street on the opposite side of the school where the parking lot is being proposed? Is there currently parking?
Correct, yes. The parking lot that we have, it holds, I think, 9 or 10 cars, right to the south, where
yeah, I'm more
right
interested.
on the opposite side, yes.
I'm more interested on the street itself. Is there parking
on the south side of G
Street?
Yes, there is. Staff mainly park on that side of G Street as well as the west side of 3rd Avenue. Some have parked on H Street. I kind of discourage that for my staff just because that's a busier, faster street. I just encourage them, and then some will park on the west side of 4th Avenue as well, but there are a couple of spots open up.
Do you know what time of day this photo was taken? Does it say by chance on any of the information what time of day or the date?
These are just from MapQuest or Google Maps, so.
So that's just again showing two different examples of know, what our thinking was. And then it's where do we go from here?
Sure, do you want to talk about the high school?
We can, there's still a lot of work to be done on that one yet, but,
So here's the high school here.
Mm-hmm.
So with the high school, we're trying to, and with all the buildings, it was to create a safe and secure entrance for all of our schools. And so for the high school, especially with the Performing Arts Center now that will be built on the north side, that pretty much eliminates, there will be an entrance there, but it will not be a main entrance. So the main entrance will be on 5th Street, facing east. Our hope is, and with the Performing Arts Center, we know that we're going to need more space for that. Some of the issues we want to bring kids up from the lower side. We don't feel that that's safe down there, especially at night when these kids are going to events out of town and they might come in at 10 or 11 o'clock and there's nobody down there to watch. We're going to lose some parking both in the north parking lot. Much of the south parking lot will also be lost. That stretch that's right by Quinn Street there.
But you're putting in additional parking where in place of part of South Campus?
Yes, there will be
There'll be
So
yeah.
that's pretty much a wash.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I should say though that program, is currently at Lincoln. This is a parking lot with about 40 parking spots.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the people that are in this building, they park here.
Mm-hmm.
So it will have to be replaced over there.
Sure, that makes sense. I believe I had a conversation with Bob, week and a half ago?
Yeah.
And I believe in your conversation with me, you had talked about your guys' desire to create a central corridor in the high school so that when people are coming, they're coming into a central corridor and then being displaced from there as far as like for events and that sort of thing, which I think is a fantastic idea. Putting, the placement of the Performing Arts Center is obviously, it has to go where you have space. I mean, it'd be nice if that could be incorporated into that, but there probably wouldn't be space for that. But I like the idea. I think it's a great idea. And obviously, parking would be needed for such a entrance.
And of course, we're also planning for the Performing Arts Center. So it's a 1,200 seat Performing Arts Center. You're probably familiar with Lakes Area Music Festival.
Mm-hmm.
He fills up Tornstrom for most of his performances. That seats about 950 people.
900. I was slightly over that.
Yeah. So we want to have adequate parking that's also safe for those people because it's a lot of older people that come to those events. And we'd probably need 400 to 500 parking spots for the Performing Arts Center if it's full. So two different needs there. One's for the high school, one's for the Performing Arts Center. Did you want to add anything, Tom?
No. If your plan is to remove the kids from the lower lot, do you have any desire to redevelop that lot? Or is that just going to be more parking that just isn't used then?
Do you know the answer to that,
I
Lane?
think that it'll still be used even during the school day because as you can see, this will create 350 additional spots, but we have 219 staff at the high school plus in our junior and senior class, and part of our sophomore class, there's 1,250 student drivers as well. And so there will still be people that'll use the campus down lower, and particularly at events, that are at the football field and so on, graduation, those types of things. We will always use the parking because of the shortage that they have at the high school. And we have Principal Rusk here as well, and I know she has shared many times that is the #1 complaint she gets.
Right, thankfully I don't get a lot of complaints even for a 50-year-old building. I know people maybe think we do, but I don't. But I think from the public and our community, parents, it's kind of sad, but I think our parents have accepted poor parking to get some more parking.
I believe we received that same letter.
Yes, Dave, you probably did, and I wrote back to her though after April 11th, because I felt like we did hopefully try to win her back to the community, but it sounds like she travels to see her granddaughter compete. If there's any questions that I can answer, we do have about 50-some bus routes that come in and out of our school as a transfer site. So even though students aren't in schools, they get off on the buses there, and we use the lower site and the upper site both morning and afternoon from students not only at kindergarten through 12th grade in our district, but St. Francis students as well. It is a transfer site, and we want to continue our work to make those transfer sites more safe. We do not have a very good parent pickup area at the high school. Mark's nodding, and I think, yeah, most people who have been around there before school and after school would agree.
On this site, just to a short synopsis, on this particular diagram, we were looking at possibly obtaining 4 additional properties. Pine Street between the 2 blocks. We would be asking the city council if we could close Pine Street. And 5th Street we would like to keep open, but we would like to ask the city council for some traffic calming to slow down the traffic that goes in front of our high school. Because we know when kids are crossing 5th Street, it's still not perfect, but if we knew that the traffic was going to slow down and such, that would help a lot.
Yeah, I believe the number is 5,300 cars a day on 5th Street. It's a very busy street.
Even more so when we notice with 6th Street Auto Commission.
Yes. Yep.
That was about the only way you could go.
Yep.
Any other questions on high school?
Not now.
Okay.
Okay, well, I think we're kind of just down to number 7, and that's discussing the impacts.
May I just offer a comment, if I may, as Councilman Lambert, from the Planning Commission's perspective? Their recommendation to the city council on the plan, yeah, there's a date on it by which it would be continued on, and I think it can be used. But I think that at least from the planning commission's perspective, that this is an issue that can be worked out relatively. It's not gonna really need a long period of time. Being subjected. With some conversations with planning commission, language changes, this might be something that right on.
That was we were planning to that it was not going to be, that we wanted it not to be a long period of time.
Sure. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on language change, or what would get worked out? I guess I'm kind of missing that
As soon
piece.
as I said that, I realized, that might not be the right phrase to use, so.
Well, no, and I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah.
So what is it that would actually change within these 60 days, let's say? So what is it?
I think that what the thought process was that, everything seemed to be going so fast, but we hadn't seen the maps. And this would give us a period of pause to say, does this fit the spirit and intent of what the ordinance modification was? If it doesn't, which we day-to-day, it really doesn't fit this very why we tried to change that, to make it easier for the schools, better for the neighborhoods, and to keep that community, that sense of community. So we gave you a period of pause where we could all sit down and have these kinds of discussions and say, okay, now that you know that you don't have to have that off-street parking, it's not required, we're not going to ask you to do it. Do you still need these parking lots? Are you still motivated to do these parking lots? Is there some compromise that could be had? And so I think that is what the spirit and the intent of the moratorium was. Although it came out differently, it was to try to get a period of pause to stop and say, is this still necessary now that you know the ordinance doesn't require it? And where is the compromise? What can we do that still maintains our community character, still maintains our neighborhoods, improves walkability, improves the sense of safety. So it's just trying to that period to be able to have that conversation.
Okay, thanks. And certainly working in partners if you want to do it. And again, it's great news. We don't have this, that's a good thing. And I think it's still, the examples if I understand correctly, still, it's just no longer required that we have to have off-street parking, which is great. It's not to say that we can't have it, it's just that with the change we're not required anymore. Am I understanding that correctly?
It's not required, but it's also not desired.
It's not desired, okay.
So I don't know that I want to say that you can't, but it's not desired. And I mean, the moratorium was the planning commission's approach to try to say, can you do these?
Sure.
All the changes to the site plans, to sites, we need to go through the planning commission, recommendation from the planning commission, council. So one of the hopes is that when that comes time for that review, that the off-street parking will not be an issue in determining whether or not recommendation from the site plans from the planning commission.
So generically, just looking at the two examples of Lowell and Garfield, generically it's desired to just not have any off-street parking, just do the construction pieces without off-street parking is what I'm hearing.
That's what you're suggesting, right, with Garfield and?
To not have any of these.
Right.
You guys, the council has not discussed this, period. There is no what we want. Okay, just so you know, it hasn't come up. This is the very first time I've seen this. So now, we can make our own comments here. There's three of us here. And so, but I would be very hesitant to say this is what the council.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So can you guys just go through a little timing thing? Because if we mention the moratorium, so if there was no city rules, would you want to start buying houses and tearing them down tomorrow, next year? I've heard the schedule of construction before, but I can't recall. What is our time frame for? My understanding is the high school's a little bit later.
Yeah, right. If we were to look at Lowell and Garfield as examples.
Yeah.
We don't have to buy that house tomorrow.
Okay.
And I might be.
Harrison
is a little bit different story.
Is Harrison a priority?
Right. It's a big priority.
Okay, so maybe we should attack it that way.
But we're also still evaluating Harrison with the likelihood of hopefully less need with that. So to your point, that to work out and sit down and look at the details in the next 30 days, I think it's certainly easy enough to do. It's not like it has to be tomorrow, but we also don't want to delay. Even today when we met, we're talking about how can we get 5 days over the next 400 days saved for construction. So every day is critical because of our limited time of being able to do the actual construction. it'd be one thing if we could tell the kids to go home for a year, which they probably wouldn't mind, but, you know, so we've got a very, very, very tight schedules with that. But, you know, if it's, and thank you, Kelly, for correcting, I should not have said that it's the council's desire, because I know it hasn't gotten to the council. I believe it's the planning and zoning perhaps, and at this stage, it's their desire to not have, hope I'm not speaking out of turn with that, their desire to not have any off-street parking. So that's where I think you get into the philosophical, what is the best thing to do.
By clarification, the council did make and approve this ordinance in January.
Yeah.
So the council did speak that they don't require that.
Right. Yep.
So that piece, the council has spoken on.
No, I was referring to the
As
moratorium.
far as the moratorium, that has not gone to the council, that has only been in the planning commission.
Well, part of that is because we wanted to sit down and talk with you guys.
Right.
You know, it makes no sense for us to vote on a moratorium if we haven't even been to the table with you. And a lot of this stuff we hadn't seen. And I will say that I was very much interested in the process of what you guys were doing because I felt it's very important for me to know.
Sure.
I said I sat through 6 of those sessions, and a lot of time I was banging my head against the wall by the end because I had heard all the same information again and again. But I felt it was important to hear individuals speak and to hear what the community members said about various different things. Not that you would report that information differently, but sometimes it's good to hear the weight behind what someone says when they say it.
Yep.
So it's good that now we've sat and I've actually seen more concrete information about what it is you're actually looking to do. So I want to make sure that you're aware that the whole reason why we haven't really went forward with a moratorium or even brought it up into that discussion is because we wanted to sit down and have a discussion with you first.
And we want you to feel that we're partners in all this. You know, the city of Brainerd was incorporated in 1871, but the Brainerd School District was started in 1872. So we've been here really almost as long as the city. But obviously what we do is we do the schools. Yeah, you guys do the city. And I apologize if maybe we got too far ahead on our thing without educating you guys on some of this or why we felt that we needed to do it. This process was about 4 years. It started in October of 2014. The legislature asked school districts to look at long-term facility needs. And we hired the Cunningham Group to look at our facilities. They made a recommendation, and it went from there, culminating on April 10th. And we had a very large voter turnout. Almost 10,000 people voted in that referendum. And resoundingly, especially question 1 that was the elementary schools, was about a 2-to-1 vote. And quite frankly, I think a lot of that success was because people wanted the neighborhood schools. You know, especially in Brainerd where they have been so ingrained. Dave mentioned, like Garfield, when people talk about that neighborhood, they call it the Garfield neighborhood. Or Harrison, they call that the Harrison neighborhood. And that's what we're trying to preserve. Yeah, so.
Yeah, I want to make sure that you guys are very well aware that of all of the sessions I sat at, even the high school, the neighborhood schools was mentioned at every single one. Forest View, high school, all of them. It was resounding that people wanted their neighborhood schools, and I think that it becomes very important to understand what makes those neighborhood schools successful. So when we talk about parking, that's where you start to lose me a little bit, in that we're now not talking about students, we're not talking about education, we're talking about vehicles. And once we start talking about that, then you need to start leaning on the expertise that we have. The city of Brainerd hires and has employed a city planner and a city engineer. And we need to fall back on their expertise as far as for planning purposes, because whereas I trust you guys to educate and to run your education system, we would hope that you would trust us to have a good insight as to how to design and create spaces for people to interact. Number 1 priority, as far as I'm concerned with the city council and the city, is to be responsible fiscally with people's money. Number 2 is safety. And so whenever we talk about safety, I want to make sure that everyone's aware. The city of Brainerd is interested in having its citizens be saved. There's no desire to create any type of system, whether it is with or without parking, that will reduce that.
Well, I think there's certainly room for compromise.
Sure.
Yeah, and I don't know where we go from here.
Sure.
because our staff works with your staff on this, so.
Can I speak just briefly about some of the numbers if we're moving on to that aspect?
Sure.
Again, I want to take cue from Kelly in saying that we're not representing the majority of the council. We're not saying that this is absolutely the council's desires, but there's a philosophy change happening in our area and specifically at the city level. And what it comes down to is the notion of the vehicle, essentially. Brainerd was created prior to vehicles being used at the extent that they are, and so we're lucky that we have a grid-based system. Grid-based system has been proven to be a fairly effective and safe method of keeping people moving and allowing for parking, that sort of thing. The thing that people forget is that in building roads, we build parking alongside those roads. Roads are extremely expensive. The most expensive thing that we as a city will pay for are the roads and the pipes. And so we need to make sure that we're being effective in the way that we're designing those things so that they can be paid for as we continue to move forward. But more importantly, it comes down to the question of safety. And I keep hearing that, and it bugs me because I've spent about 3 years now doing a ton of research on roads and safety and passageways and that sort of thing. And the data overwhelmingly shows that neighborhood schools are extremely safe, extremely safe. You see very, very low accidents at those schools. And actually, if you want to pull up the numbers, in the last 12 years, using the MnDOT data for crashes that were reported, Garfield School had 3 accidents during school hours, actually 3 accidents total in 12 years, 2 of which were buses hitting parked cars, 1 of which was an actual accident. None of those included pedestrians. When you go to Harrison School, you've had 4 during business hours, or during school hours, 7 to 4 p.m. And at Lowell School, you've had 8. And that's in the last 12 years. So accidents aren't happening at these schools, and there's a reason for that. It's because most people are driving safely, and we've done a good job of educating people as to how to drive around schools. I think there's a study from Minnesota from 1998 to 2000, a 2-year period. There were a total of 10 accidents, including cars and pedestrians, within 1,000 feet of schools. And since then, the numbers nationwide have dropped 74% in accidents involving child pedestrians. At the same time, next year, 10,000 Americans will die in a car accident. And the strange thing about it, people believe that we got to make sure the kids aren't walking. We got to make sure that all this stuff is. We've created these safe corridors, but more kids are killed in cars being driven to school than they are walking to school, and it's resounding, the numbers they're put in place with that. And part of it really comes down to the way that these roads are created, and it has a lot to do. If you want to get really into it, which I have, sadly, spent way too much time on this, it comes down to visual scope. So as you're driving, the wider your visual scope is, the faster you tend to go. So the trick is to make sure that you're keeping things, at least visually, narrow. People tend to drive slower, they tend to be more responsive, and they tend to pay a little bit more attention. And more importantly, when you open that space up, people start to accelerate. The more they accelerate, the faster they're going, the more accidents they are. And the one thing that you hear a lot anecdotally from people is, oh, my sister or myself, we saw a close call with a kid near a school. The thing of that is that's actually a positive thing. When you have a close call, it means that the safety measures that are in place are working. And I know that's a scary thing to mention and to say anytime that a kid almost gets hit by a car, that may be a positive thing, but what it shows is that while people are driving in those areas, they tend to be more alert, they tend to be more aware of what they're doing, and more importantly, they tend to be slowing down. And so when we start to open up the spaces, even if it's just a parking lot, you really will start to see people accelerate more than you think that you will. And that's where my main concern comes here. If we're gonna say safety, that's fine, but then I need numbers. I need numbers and I need information that says why this is safer. Why are we creating a safer space? Because overwhelmingly the information actually goes the opposite way. It's much, much safer to have roadways constructed the way that we have than to start opening them up and to say, well, now we've got a parking space here. And sadly, and this isn't necessarily to go against what you're saying, but as I look at the numbers you're showing here, the overwhelming majority of spaces are gonna be taken up by staff. And I know that may open up spaces around the schools for parents to park, but we've addressed that situation with the Safe Routes to School, specifically around Garfield, where by the end of next year, I believe, am I correct, Paul? You should be within 1 block of a sidewalk anywhere in Northeast on the Garfield side. And the idea of that is allowing people to get off the street, park your car, get on the sidewalk, walk up to the school. You may have to walk. I know that that's a hard thing for people to digest from time to time, but in designing a city, you have to understand that we're very dense. We're somewhere around 2,500 people per square mile in the city of Brainerd. It's very dense, and it's different than when you're building a school out in the middle of nowhere. You're building within an area that has a lot of people, a lot of things moving, a lot of moving pieces, and we need to make sure that we're designing that using data and best practices, as opposed to, well, I think it would be good to be able to get some of these teachers to park across the street.
Very good. Interesting numbers.
Like I said, I've spent way too much time on it. But and what I want to say to you guys is that the city of Brainerd has no desire to fight with you over things, but we do want to make sure that we're on the same page. We do understand why there are some of us, because again, I can't speak for everybody, but there are some of us that feel that it's time to stop designing things so that I can get out of my car and walk directly into a building, whether it be a school or a business. Because what happens then is you're going to have less buildings, you're going to have less housing, you're going to have less businesses, and that's not a sustainable model for a city. And on our end of things, we have to be aware of that. We have to be aware that we are creating a city that can thrive and can pay for itself, as opposed to just signing off on everything that comes through.
I would though say, Dave, that when these schools are done, they're going to be an economic driver for the city.
Oh, I absolutely believe so.
And I think people, like take Harrison, people are going to want to live in that neighborhood because you have to live in the geographical area for those schools. So I think not only will you have a demand for housing, you'll also increase property values because people want to live close to these schools.
Yeah, it's not lost on me. In our conversation that I had with you, and I might as well share it with everyone, the number one greatest thing that we have in our area is our neighborhood schools. The way that our school system, 181, has set itself up is, in my opinion, and maybe that's just because I come here and I came through it, but we are the greatest school system in the state because we do things differently, and I appreciate that. I like that when I look out in the crowd, I actually recognize the principals of the various schools. I know who they are, and I know in listening to you speak about your students, there's a type of care that goes there, and I'm not saying that that isn't the case with the majority of schools anywhere, but there's something different about the way that we do it because we've created it in the neighborhoods. Harrison is a fantastic example because if you look at economics and all that type of stuff, there should be kids falling behind in certain areas. They don't fall behind, and the reason they don't fall behind is because we've created a system that doesn't let them fall behind. But let's not throw that away. Let's remember that it's important to understand that if you're going to have a school in an area, why do you have it there? Because if you're not going to continue to have the area and continue to mold the area based off of what it is, it's very hard to then say, well, what we did was great, but we really need to have some parking. And that's really where I start to draw the line, is I can't make that leap and say that that's the next step, is that we absolutely need to be able to get these parking stalls in place in order for these schools to continue. What was it, 2014 that we had all 6 of the schools were blue ribbon? Okay, that says something, because if you look at economics and you look at the various different schools in the various, because it's a wide, vast district, you would have holes. You would have certain areas that were performing better than others, and they don't, because we've created a system that's very effective.
So where do we go from here?
Can I just share something?
Please.
This has been, it's been great to hear how everyone feels about this, because truly everyone here today has a great passion for the school district and for the city of Brainerd. And ultimately, we're all here for the same reason, because we want to continue to make Brainerd the best it can be. We're all here for the same reason. One thing from the school's perspective though, and long before I came, at least 2 years, you've said 2014 just a little bit ago, Bob, that the school district started doing research on comprehensive facility planning on what we were going to do for the community to continue to make our schools viable and different, and yet doing excellent work, just like you said just a little bit ago, David. And so I was fortunate in 2016 when I came here that I could look at the work that had been done through the Cunningham Group. But one of the things that was in that report around every school, and honestly in that report, there were ideas at that time about the fact that we wanted to build 2 new schools, close down some of the neighborhood schools, and so on. And when I came here, the Board of Education said, we really need to listen to the public. We need to hear more from the public. And that's why we went out and we did well over 200 informational sessions, collecting information. Over 1,700 people provided information from surveys. The Board of Education identified the objectives that they were going that were going to lead this process. Number 1 being safety and security. But in every one of the plans that were put together that the Board of Education approved, safety and security, separate bus and parent drop-offs and pickups were listed in there, and additional parking around the schools if we were going to keep the neighborhood schools. The school district completed 4 years of work, getting this, believing that they had the right plan. And so by the beginning of December last year, 2017, the Board of Education felt that they had listened to the public, that they had developed the plan that was going to meet those objectives that we talked about. And so on December 7th, I asked the school district to publish the agenda for the December 11th meeting. December 11th, the Board of Education approved this plan, which was 4 years worth of work. It talked about safety and security, additional parking, additional bus drop-off, pickup, and etc. That was on the 11th. That was the same day that the email came to Steve and to Erica and to Kevin. That email did not come to me, the superintendent, and it did not come to the board chair. We didn't have that day that the Board of Education voted on that plan. During that time from December 11th until January 9th, we had to develop the review and comment, which went to MDE. We developed it based on the plan that the board approved. We took this document, we submitted it, we all worked together. We brought it forward to MDE. They went through it. There are certain criteria that we as school districts have to do as far as the amount of space for the buildings, as far as parking around our facilities, and we complied with the requirements that MDE set for the school district moving forward. At that time, once that was approved, then we went out and we did 100 more presentations. And on April 10th, we brought the 3 questions to the public, and the public said that they felt that we had the right plan. But when we look at the review and comment, we look at the plan approved by the Board of Education, every time it says that we're going to separate the bus and parent drop-offs and pickups, that we're going to provide more parking along with all of the additional pieces in the building. And so part of this for me is that I feel like we've made this promise to the public, this is what the public voted on, and that we have a responsibility to carry out the wishes of the public.
Well, I'll agree with you. I think that it's great great that everyone stood up and voted in favor of our schools. I think that had they not, we wouldn't be looking at neighborhood schools in 5 years. You guys would have had to re-change your plan, and it would have came back with 2 big schools, and they would have been a completely different ordeal. So I'm extremely happy that it went through. I don't want anyone to think that I'm not. I voted for it myself.
I don't want to interrupt, but I do want to say something. The first plan actually had that, and because of all the information that we collected from the public, the board changed their minds and kept the neighborhood schools for that reason.
And I thank you guys for doing that. But I do want to make sure that in saying that everyone voted, or that the resounding number of people voted in favor of the plan, doesn't necessarily mean that we can't step back and look at the individual pieces and say what this is probably doesn't fit the spirit of where we're trying to go forward. We're really looking to see where Brainerd is going to be in 25 to 30 years. And one of the biggest agenda items that we have is that we're trying to redefine the way that our city is used. We're trying to change the mindset, which is unbelievably difficult. I myself, I'm a champion for the on-street parking and the removal of parking requirements, but even myself one day tried to park in a parking lot downtown. There was no spot, and I immediately got nervous and thought to myself, well, now what? And you know what? I drove around the corner and there was a spot. But I immediately thought to myself, if I am so aware of this and have those feelings, it's going to be much harder to retrain the public to have that type of mindset. I heard a comment the other day that someone couldn't believe that they had to walk a block. And that blew me away. I can't believe that we've gotten to the point in our society where we can't walk a block without having it be an irritant. You know, we have to be able to coexist in an area that is as dense as it is, and hopefully will become more dense, but we have to do so in a way that almost retrains our thought process a little bit, because we're so used to, for the last 30 years, driving out to big box stores and parking. And the problem is you're walking about a block anyways to get to the door, but you can see that destination, and that has been ingrained in who we are. However, big box stores are failing, and those types of experiences people aren't looking for anymore. And so as a city, we have to say, well, how do we create a space, and how do we create an experience for our residents and for our visitors that is more in line with where things are headed? And that's where we get to with this, is that I in many ways question some of the things going forward in the referendum, but I wanted it to pass. So I bit my tongue on a few things, but now we're to that point where we have to have that discussion. We have to start talking about, is this portion of it the correct method? And again, I'd love to separate the high school from the elementary schools, because I think that when we talk about the high school, there are options that we could look at that could make things easier for you. One of the things that was brought up by Councilman Johnson was there's perhaps an ability to work with the library and gifting that parking lot to you guys so that you could have that full length of space. Whether or not that's something we can work out or not, it could be a great way of including the library into the campus almost, in that now people can extend, or you have a long parking lot that works for your event space. You know, working with Pine Street and trying to create the best possible way for that to work in 5th Street, I think is great. But if you guys are willing to work with us a little bit on the neighborhood elementary schools, that will go a long way to helping us in our decision of how we can best help you, specifically with the high school. Because I think the high school is, to me, the high school is the bigger of the issues. Like our principal said, it's 7 days a week. I know that. I've been there 7 days a week for various events. But we don't see that with the elementary schools. I'm not saying there isn't a need completely, but at the same time, I would ask in the northeast side of things, and I know Councilman Johnson had spoke about southeast, in that our residents have spoken and have said to us that those schools are so important. And I want to keep that school, or those schools, intact in the way that they're functioning now. And like I said, I hate to say it, but when you start talking about safety, it isn't. I mean, the numbers don't show the types of things that we talk about. I'm all for controlled entrances. I think sadly in today's society we need them. I think that's a very sad thing. But when we're talking about parking lots, I think that's slightly different. And pick up and drop off, there's, in looking at your plan, and I've picked up and dropped off at Garfield School, you have separated pick up and drop offs. The parking lot isn't associated with that. Harrison School is slightly different because you guys will be addressing the entrance of the school. But I really hope that we can separate ourselves from pick up and drop off, high schools and elementary schools, because I think when we group them all together and we start coming up with one philosophy, it doesn't necessarily help, and in a lot of ways it hinders.
Yeah, I would agree with you, David. I think the high school is a bigger challenge. There's a lot of work that has to be done. I think the idea of the public library would be a fantastic opportunity to try to pull all that in together. And if that means there's a little less new parking someplace else, that'd be fantastic. And we let's work at trying to pull that together. Yep. The lower lot is another one of those kind of mystery pieces of how it's used and whatnot. So I think that does make sense to separate the high school from elementaries. Definitely makes sense in my mind. And perhaps it is too hard to define from a safety standpoint until you really live that environment, like the principals and teachers do.
As the residents do as well, though.
As the residents do too. I mean, as far as the potential, I guess. Sure. The statistics show we've got a good track record.
We have an excellent track. I would say a phenomenal track record.
Which is great. Even I was as board members were assigned to one of the elementary schools on opening day, and this year I was up at Nisswa, and their pickup or their drop off is through the parking lot, and there was a couple of times where I was ready to go out into the street because I was concerned about it. The year before I was at Harrison, and that scared the daylights out of me. I'm thankful that our principal was there because it's a busy street. There's a lot of traffic that goes on there. But maybe if we could, I agree. Let's split, because I think let's split those out. I also think it's important to work together. I think Mark said it an hour ago. We could probably get this nailed out in the next 30 days or something like that. I think it is maybe important though. I did hear from a city standpoint, fiscal responsibilities, priorities, safety is second. Cassandra, you passed out something that you didn't get a chance to share, or if you were planning to share on what this document.
It was just mostly an informational piece so that can understand fiscal impact. I don't know if anybody had sat down and actually put together the fiscal impact of and so we did that. We classified each property by what it is based on the address list that you published. And then we did the estimated market value. We applied which ones had homestead exclusion on that, which ones were rental units, how many units those were, so you could get a big picture of how many potential families you might be impacting. And then we broke out county, city, and school tax, so you could see the impacts to each entity by removal of those properties. And we totaled it for you, so you can see a cumulative total of removal of properties. So you don't necessarily lose those dollars, but they get reallocated. And so those dollars, the tax dollars, would then go on to the remaining homes that are still left. And so when you remove 27 properties, you redistribute those taxes. So somebody else's taxes might go up a little bit more. The other thing I think that is important just to understand on this is the estimated market value. When you remove 27 properties, you also you lower the city's overall estimated market value, which makes an impact to city's ability to borrow if you need to for critical infrastructure. So anytime you remove or lower your estimated market value, you also remove or lower your bond cap. So that then impacts things like being able to bond for things like fire trucks or street repairs or sewer and water infrastructure, things like that, because you lower the ability to borrow. Not that we want to have to borrow, but sometimes you do. There are projects that are exponentially expensive. And so what we did here was just put it all into a simple format so you could understand it there, and then we also did it in a pictorial format so you could see around each of the schools where those properties are and what each of of those values are, so you can see it two different ways. Just thought it would be helpful.
Yeah,
for the
no, it's
conversation.
great. It's too bad that the city doesn't get credit for having wonderful schools, right? New school buildings or renovated school buildings, but you don't get credit for your tax base and stuff. So,
No.
so if I'm looking at this right, and a total of all 27 of all the properties, just for the city alone, it's over 15,000. Like you said, you don't lose the tax revenue. It's spread amongst the other areas.
It's redistributed, but then when you take and compound that by, homes are gone forever and replaced with parking lots, you lose that tax base to a parking lot that doesn't contribute tax base.
Yeah.
And you lose that forever. It never comes back.
Yeah.
And so that's just another thing to step back and look at, that, it does impact the city fiscally, and that, as Leo mentions, one of our primary tenants, we want to make sure that we are responsible fiscally with what we do as a city. So I don't know that you ever step back and look at it this way. I don't know if like, I'm an out-of-the-box thinker, so I like to look at things.
Yeah, no, I definitely, that's great. I definitely did, and I'm also a believer in moving forward that, and as Bob had mentioned, from an economic impact, boy, if we don't get this 100 times back, we made a big mistake, and I don't believe that's the case just through the, the economic engine that's going to occur with these changes. And I love the idea, and we talked a lot about the neighborhood schools and how it's kind of impacting the various parts of our city too. It's not just one.
Absolutely, and I can attest to the fact that the homes around Garfield are very sought after. As someone that is on the council, and I am representative of a ward, so if I'm looking at housing, I have to look in my ward. And it's amazing how quickly the homes that are around those schools go when they get on the market. Yeah. Specific streets are very desirable, and the ones around Garfield are phenomenal, specifically 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th Avenue. Those are fantastic streets. And so part of me looks at that and says, well, that'd be a nice home for a family, much like my own. But I want to make sure that in saying that and in talking about the fiscal end of things, that it's not lost, that we do understand that there is going to be a huge impact in this. And what are the final numbers as far as millions that we're looking at being spent?
200 million. Yeah, and at least 100 million in Brainerd.
$100 million being spent in Brainerd is a huge amount of money.
Well, it's about 100.
That's just the
And
high school.
115.
And we're not, that is not lost on us whatsoever. Just to clarify too about the library, just because I know the dispatchers here and others who may be listening, the concept is that we do own the lot north of the library, and we currently lease it, but it's only leased at about 20% roughly, I believe. And so the thought process was perhaps moving the parking for the library on the north side of it. That may include some switching of the entrance and that sort of thing. But just looking at that map, that gives you guys a very nice long parking lot. That could be something that we could work with if you're willing to work with us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll consider that one done then.
Okay. Well,
Wait.
Is somebody chairing this?
It's just informal.
Okay.
Probably these two ladies.
I have to go. Okay, I apologize. But as far as where, I'd like to say what I think you should go from here. This is the first time we've seen this. We should take it back to the council so they can all see it, share it with us. I'm a little disappointed that now that you understand the intent of the ordinance change, regardless of the grammatical corrections still needed, that you would not consider potentially reevaluating what you've given us. That sounds disappointing to me, because this is going to be a little give and take, right? It's going to be the two boards coming together to make this happen, some way, some form. And now you have a new understanding of the ordinance, yet, and it might be that this is the absolute bare minimum, right? I don't know that. I haven't sat through 4 years of meetings, okay? Right, so, but I have sat through a school closing, so I know exactly what that does to a neighborhood. It's absolutely devastating. That being said, I also know what it's like to have, 500 cars parked in your neighborhood for a school pageant, and in a way, I would argue it's kind of cool. Okay, so so anyway, I think that the next step is to look at the 3 grade schools, paying particular attention to Harrison based on what you've asked, okay? Also recognizing the fact that you don't have a full plan for Harrison. But we just have to go back to our board to show them what we have so far. At least now we have something. We also have a recommendation for planning and zoning that they deserve an answer on. So I can't speak to that because we haven't talked about it yet. That being said, I would imagine that some of our board members will have, or all of them will have something to say about what we got today, and they might look at things different than the school board. I don't know. It might be just okay. This is what you need. This, I can't even imagine. But we'll move forward from there. I would hope you guys would do the same. That you would look at, is this now that we know about the ordinance, Josh Garden is the master of the semicolon. He'll fix that. Colon, right?
Oh, I said semicolon.
Right.
Oh, it's my
Before I retire, I want that fixed, or I'm not retiring. Isn't that what you said?
I don't think that's possible anymore.
Go with the flow. Okay. And then we need to get back together, right? I would think as soon as obviously you have your plan squared away and we have some thoughts for you on what the ordinance is.
I think that'd be good.
Yeah, and especially with Harrison, because, yeah.
Especially with Harrison, which is the one we said you
Because
should
that would start next summer. Yeah.
So you'll, if I'm hearing you right,
Yeah.
you'll visit as a council and then let's get some kind of a group back together.
I can only guess, but I would imagine we would select a representative to come.
Kelly, in September, we had a short presentation to the city council, and we had talked at that meeting about the fact that we would like to get on a board agenda to do this presentation.
I think
And so,
excellent.
but it was before all of this happened, and so we had talked about potentially coming in November. Is this something that this team right here thinks that maybe we need to have a little more conversation and then come forward to the city council, or do you want us to come to the city council? Because Corey and I could certainly do that, or the board, whatever. What would you like?
I can only speak for myself,
Yeah.
but I think it'd be best to get things squared away with what you think for Harrison before you do.
Okay, so if we're willing to sit down as a school district and talk about a few of these properties, if there's something that we could do to compromise in some respects, you're open to that, and then sitting down and.
Personally, absolutely. I think you need to move forward. You got a construction deadline.
We do, and
Right.
we're starting to get behind it, yeah.
I understand that on the other side of the coin. What we're trying, and we had the moratorium explained to us at the last council meeting. The intent was to take the step back and get to this point or get to the next point without any undue destruction and reconstruction of parking lots. So that was my understanding of the intent, and to me that made sense. At this point, we hadn't even seen this. So, right? So if you hear well, the school district is going to buy houses and tear them down, I would say, my first thought without even knowing anything would be, whoa, I thought that was pretty good advice from planning. So, that being said, we now know a lot more. We need to hear from our council, and we need to discuss. There's a lot of pros and cons to what's going to happen. This is one of them. But if we can get the details before the end of the year or sooner with those 3 schools working together.
I have to say, when the presentations that we've had, even at the planning and zoning, parking has always been an issue of the parking lots. I mean, that's always been a constant between all our planning and zoning with the school, is that we didn't want the parking lots. So, if I'm right.
You're right.
Yeah, so I just think it shouldn't be a big surprise to you guys that we were saying that we didn't want a lot of off-street parking.
There's something that's been gnawing at me that I still want to get on the table before, and I'll make this quick. All these physical improvements in the infrastructure is part of the picture. There's another part of this picture that we're not yet talking about, and that's behaviors. behaviors of parents, the behaviors of children, the behaviors of the community. And I think that's a real important part of how we're going to address these neighborhood schools and how they're going to function. And it's going to be difficult. It's going to be messy. No one's going to want to perhaps start. We need to have conversations. I'm part of an organization called Crowing Energize. Our motto is make the healthy choice the easy choice. But we need to have a discussion about making driving children to school is not the easy choice. We need to change that narrative. We're creating the neighborhood schools for a purpose. For the neighborhoods and for the community. We want to encourage those neighborhood schools to be used by neighbors for walking to school. And those that are being driven to school, we should make it more difficult for them to be able to do that. And I think that will help with the problems of the pickup and the drop-off, and there's also other avenues that could be explored for creating more safe drop-off areas for those neighborhood schools. I think behaviors is something that, and this is my last chance to say this, before I leave. Going to have discussions about behavior to make this successful.
Just briefly, I'll piggyback on what Mark is saying. I don't want to echo the difficulty part. We don't want to make things difficult for people, but we want to make you understand that there are repercussions to your decisions. And Forest View is a great example. You guys had no idea that your pickup and drop off was going to be set up the way that it was, because there wasn't that idea that people would do that. In streets, we look at it and we say, when you expand a road, traffic is very dense, so you expand the road, and so you're going to get rid of traffic. It's about a 1-to-1 ratio of people. If you extend the capacity, eventually people will use that capacity. And so that type of mindset puts you behind the 8 ball, because you're constantly trying to redefine the space to open up the capacity, when really what you need to do is fix the behavior. The behavior becomes the issue. And with these schools, we need to make sure that we're creating it to succeed as much as possible. Like I said, how much, Mark, or Paul, how much we've spent on Safe Routes to School using federal dollars? About $1 million. So, I mean, we've invested a lot of money in putting into sidewalks for these exact purposes. And from our standpoint, that's an investment we've made looking forward and trying to create a space. And we just want to make sure that we're on the same page and headed in the same direction, because behaviors is part of the problem.
Jody, did you have something back on?
I do. Coming to Garfield, this is my 4th year as a principal, and one of my first meetings with the local law enforcement, we had an open house night. My first year at Garfield, we had a young man who made his way to Garfield because that was his new school. He was an excited kindergartner, 5 years old, all of the joy of life coming to school for open house. He came without a parent that night, showed up. None of us knew who he was. So, of course, as a concerned principal, the child was brought to me, and I called home. Mom wasn't answering. I called local law enforcement. I learned a lot in my first open house, because the police said to me, "You currently have 53 sexual predators living in your school zone in the northeast quadrant of Brainerd," which made me really, I will say I appreciate safety. Thank you for being attended my school and probably listened to some of my talks.
I attended your school myself.
I understand. I don't want to say that we're negating the concerns. Believe me, when you change your policy as far as how many parking spots are going to be, my school probably cheered a little bit the most, because our entire playground would become a parking lot had you not changed that. So please know that our children are very thankful, as are we. I just have to advocate for my kids, and knowing, I agree with the behavior of parents and a lot of people driving. I just have a tough time telling my parents that their child walking to school is always the safest option. Because we've had children followed home, vehicles that have been called into local law enforcement that are constantly
was that located? Because that's not.
That was on Junction of L.
Was that reported?
It was after, yep, it was after crossing guard hours. He had come back to the building and the crossing guards were done with their duty. He then navigated his way back and was, knocked to the ground, but he was hit by a vehicle. His mother called. I was on the way, so his mother had called the school and said he'd been hit by a car.
Mm-hmm.
That anything had occurred, so it kind of went reported.
Okay.
Which compounds our problem, we've got some big pieces that we are responsible for making sure the team is safe and sound. So please know that we do appreciate your work done. We've got behaviors of adults, but some of their behaviors right now are
So how do we want to, so temporary, I'm assuming, discuss within the council. We're going to revisit the 3 elementaries. And then kind of get together again from there. That sound like?
Sounds good too.
Is that what you want to do, or?
Yeah.
And then Sandra and myself, we can get it organized? That work? Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah,
everyone.
thank you.
Yeah, congratulations, Mark.
Thanks for your passion.
Thank you.
This will go a long way to get that. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
This is going to be a very big issue for you guys.
Where are we here? For what school?
So that must be the north.
But you're gonna take a look.
Okay.
What I'm hearing? I'm working on that.
If we, okay.